Hi guys, how are you? Back in the wood shop, different shirt, cleaner day. Today what we're gonna do is a little something that we talked about the last time when I went over quickly how to take a board, how to joint the board, and then go to the table saw, rip it to the width that you wanted. I went over to the chop saw or the miter saw, I squared it and I cut it to length. What I started to think about was, how does this relate to what we're doing? Well, it relates to every single board that you're ever going to use in here, because every board has to be square. Unless you're making a project like a hand cut, hand mirror, something that doesn't have any squared ends or edges. Every board that you're going to cut should relate this way. I take a board, I cut it to a workable size, I join an edge, I rip it to width, I go back to the miter saw, I square an end, I cut it to length. The project that we're going to work on today is one that I have thought about for a long time. We have usually at the end of the school year, we have an issue with scrap wood. People are cutting projects. There's a little piece of wood here, a little piece of wood here. And I was always raised never to waste anything. So what I always look to do is, how can we make a project out of small little pieces of scrap wood that's, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 inches long, narrow width. What can we do out of that? The solution that I came up with was a project that I have the advanced students make as a required project, and that is to make a cheese board. A little cheese board which will get your feet wet in terms of the woodworking abilities that you have. Working on the joiner, the table saw, the miter saw, you'll be doing some gluing up. If you're lucky enough, you'll be able to use the surfacer. You'll also use the band saw, you use the spindle sander. So it's a good project because it involves an awful lot of machinery. What am I talking about? Here's a good example of a cheese board that's made. And what I like about this is that everyone is pretty much different. It's only bound by your imagination and good taste. If you look at this cheese board here, this is one that's been completed. Some scrap pieces of wood that we have that are probably only about 9 or 8.5 or 9 inches long comprise this, with the one handle piece being a longer piece. If you look at this, we have a piece of walnut, we have a piece of, looks like oak, a couple of pieces of purple heart sandwiched into the maple handle. If you look at other ones, I think that this one is a cool one because it kind of encompasses the natural look of a piece of oak. If you look at this, God doesn't make mistakes. So when you look at this, you go, wow, that's really cool. This kind of almost live edge sort of look. But oak, and I have a wilder piece of walnut that kind of shows the spring wood and the heartwood, some purple heart, that piece of oak. So here again, different, but also very nature oriented. Some wormholes over here, but that's okay. If you look at this one, a walnut, solid walnut cheese board, but there was the inlay of maple over here. And you could also do the inlay on the other side to kind of look like these are all different pieces. So there are many, many different looks to it. And it's up to you to decide what it is you want to do. For most people, when I talk to them about doing this, they'll say to me, oh, I want a piece of white oak. I want a piece of red oak. Most of the time, people aren't really accustomed to what a piece of wood looks like. So what I'll suggest you do is just look around the shop. Is there any scrap pieces that we could use? Before we started this video, I kind of went around and sort of looked at what we had. I found this piece of maple, which I might be able to use. This piece of walnut that somebody used for a picture frame that's just gonna get tossed out. This was the handle that I cut the other day. The handle has to be a certain size, or according to my plan, the size that I want the cheese board to be, has to be a certain size, and we'll take a look at the planning part of that. But there's a whole bunch of different pieces. Somebody used this to cut out some walnut plugs. This will be discarded, but what I did was I jointed this edge, and maybe I can use some pieces off of this piece of walnut. Here's a piece of cherry. Somebody was test drilling a hole. Of course, they put a hole here. Nobody's going to use this piece. Somebody started to make a cut here. Nobody's going to use that, but we could use this for just little scrap pieces that would make up our cheese board and give it some nice color with some cherry. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to decide what I can get out of these pieces. If you look at this piece of walnut, Here is what I have decided to do. I'm going to make a whole bunch of these, not just one single one. So if I said to you, well, you want a piece of wood 2.5 inches wide, 13.5 inches long, remember thickness, width, and length. We need one of these, and we need an area that's made up on either side of 3 inches wide, 8.5 inches long. This really doesn't mean anything to you, but you can physically see what this thing should look like. It is a template, it's a guide. It's what I'm gonna use to guide me into how I want this thing to go together. The template requires you to make the handle as one piece, which is what I cut the other day. What I want to do out of my scrap pieces is make a conglomeration, a collection. And it doesn't matter in terms of the colors or anything like that. I just needed to make up, or I need to make up 3 inches wide, 8.5 inches long for my side. So that's what I'm going to try to do with the scrap pieces that I have. Before I do any of that stuff, I kind of have to measure and assess what I'm going to do. So with my template off to the side as my guide, I know that this is going to be my handle, so I can leave this off to the side. What I want to figure out is what can I get out of these pieces and what do I want it to look like? A huge thing for me is always contrast. If I look at these two pieces, I have a piece of oak and I have a piece of maple. I love the white and I love the dark. The other thing that I really like is the contrast of the dark walnut with the light maple. I'm going to probably use some combination of these, but I'm probably not going to decide this until I actually go over and cut and see what I can get out of these pieces. To do that, I have to have a jointed edge on each piece. So, as an example, somebody was cutting on the bandsaw, and this is the waste piece that they have. Can I use this? The requirement is on the sides that it has to be at least 8.5 inches. So if you look at this, people would say, no, you can't use it. But if I measure this out, I could probably get something out of this about 8.5 inches long. So if I look at this, I have this rounded edge, which I can't use. I have a flat edge, but it's not jointed. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this is very typical of what you're going to find wood around the shop, is you got to clean up this edge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a walk over to my jointer. I'm going to joint this edge with the same practices we talked about the other day. So I select this, take a walk over to the joiner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to joint this edge until it cleans up, where I can put this up against the fence on the table saw and cut it to a certain width. To do that, I assess my joiner. Everything looks good. I'm going to roll up my sleeves, safety glasses on. I'm going to start at the in-feed table, work my way over to the out-feed table, and keeping my stock up against the fence. When I do this, turn the machine on. Make sure I never stand directly in back of the joiner. Take my board, place it up against the fence and the table. My left hand will hold the stock up against the fence. My right thumb acts as a push stick, and I'm going to push my board all the way through. When I'm doing that, as I talked about before, I want to keep my weight all the way in the back. Keep my hands up away from the board, and I want to listen to the machine. It cut all the way over here, but it didn't cut anything over here, which is a clear indication that I have to join it again. I am going to joint it as many times as required until I hear a sound all the way across this entire edge. Again, I miss over here, so I'll joint it again. Keeping pressure down, all my weight on the back of the project. And I heard a noise pretty much all the way across the end. So I'm going to go probably one more time. All my weight in the back, fingers up, sleeves up. And you can hear that there was a sound across. So if I look at this edge, across this entire edge is completely clean. Just like I do with any piece that's been jointed, I put an X on the edge and I break my pencil tip. That's going to tell me I'm going to put that edge up against the fence on the table saw when I cut it. Now I'm at a loss. Do I sharpen my pencil or do I go on the table saw because I know I'm going to need this pencil again? because it's a movie, I sharpened it. Take a walk with me. I have no idea how wide to cut these pieces. I'm simply going to look at this and assess how wide or how many pieces I can get out of each board. I don't necessarily, because this is scrap and it's going to be tossed out anyway, I don't necessarily have to make this the exact center. I don't have to use both exact pieces of this board that are going to be 8.5 inches long. So what I'll do is I'll just look at it and say, I think that looks good. I'm going to take my guard, again, remove the guard for me, simply because I want you guys to be able to see me make this cut. Now, let's figure out what I have here. Okay. Here's my handle. This is what I need to get. I got that bad boy. I really like walnut, and I really like maple. If I go through this scrap, here's a scrap piece of maple that looks like it already has a machined edge to it. That looks pretty good. I'm going to put that aside. Here's another piece of maple. Looks like somebody jointed this already. Maybe I could use this piece. I'm definitely going to use this piece of walnut. So with this in mind, I like that. That looks pretty good. If I take this piece, I want to measure this out and see if I can get at least 17 inches. How do I get 17 inches? If I look, my boards on the sides have to be at least 8.5 inches long. So if I measure this, can I get 17 out of this? Yeah, I get probably 19 or so. So I can get a piece of walnut for either side. So this one is pretty much done because that's already been cut. The next thing that I want to do is cut a piece of walnut or maple or cherry to go up against it. If I take this piece of walnut, put it up against her, it defeats the purpose of the contrast. And also, why would I cut another piece of walnut and put it up against her? I want to see some color. So what I'll do is, as I think, maybe this piece of cherry would look pretty cool up against there. Maybe the maple would, I like the maple. I see a bigger contrast with the maple. Is this piece at least 8.5 inches long? It's almost 10 inches long. I can get a piece or two pieces out of it. So now the question becomes, do I want to keep the knot? Do I want to get rid of the knot? Most of the time, I'm a huge fan of being natural and leaving it. But if I feel this knot, it's not a solid, tight knot. I could actually move this. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to take this board and measure up to the knot, set my fence to that width, and cut my board to this size, which happens to be about 1/2 inch or so. So I'll get 1/2 inch out of here, I'll get 1/2 inch out of this side, and that'll give me my contrasting white on my dark walnut. So here goes. I take my board, I move them out of the way. I'm going to raise the blade to 1/8 to 1/16 above the height of my surface of my board. The next thing I'm going to do is set the fence to 1/2 inch. I'll loosen up my fence, slide it over. Once I slide it over and get to my 1/2 inch measurement, I lock it down. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get myself prepared, ready to cut. Without the guard in place, it is a dangerous cut. Remember, you don't want to do this unless you're either over or your supervisor, an adult is supervising you, or someone is on that side grabbing the board through, because there's always some tentativeness whenever you rip a piece that's this small. In this case, with my years of experience and a little prayer, I'm going to make this cut by myself. I'm going to use my push block. The fence has been set, the blade has been set. I'm gonna take my machined edge, put it up against the fence. I'm gonna cut from this side, flip it around, cut from this side, and finish my 2 pieces of maple. To do this, always start it, and I never like to put my head in front of that blade. My board goes up against the fence. L with my left hand holds the stock up against the fence. And the thing that I always want you guys to remember is I'm pushing the wood underneath my left hand. I never ride my left hand with it. I always push it underneath. So with my left hand here and stationary, holding the stock up against the fence, I'll push the board through. I drop my left hand, and I'm going to push it all the way, all the way. That's not all the way, that's not all the way, that is. So here's my board. I always worry about that because I see people reach in and grab that piece of scrap. I don't think so. I'd rather be safe than sorry. If you look, 10 fingers and I want to keep them all. I'm sorry, 10 fingers and I want to keep them all. I'm going to take my board, flip it around, have this machined edge up against the fence. I'll make the same cut on the opposite side. Oops, let me move that away. Now with my left hand, hold the stock up against the fence, and I'll send it. And again, never grab for that scrap. I always shut it off and take a step off to my left-hand side. So here's my piece that's left over. That was the knot I was trying to get rid of. Nobody really could use this piece. So I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna put this in the scrap box. So these are gonna be my 2 pieces that will act as bookends to my walnut. The next thing I wanna do is I wanna get another darker piece. Of course I don't wanna use another piece of maple. So how about a piece of this cherry? And I love cherry. I love the colors. I love the hue of it. It gets darker with age. I'm going to use this piece of cherry. Does my cherry measure out to at least 17 inches long? I need to get 2 8.5-inch pieces out of it. I take it, I measure it. Yep, 19 inches. Now again, I'm only bound by the distance away from that hole. So I can cut this any width that I want it to be. The one thing that I really don't like, I can't stand symmetry. When it comes to woodworking, there's so many times where we make the same thing on one side as we do with the other, which I will. But what I don't like is if every single piece is the same width as the piece before. It almost looks like a checkerboard or a zebra. What I want to do is I vary the width. So the handle is 2.5 inches wide. The walnut piece, I have no idea how wide that was. I just found that piece. This piece of maple is going to be 1/2 inch. I like cherry, so I'm going to try to cut as much of this cherry out as I can. I can probably get 1 1/8 out of this. And I think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to set the fence to 1 1/8 wide. I'm going to lock the fence in. Take my scrap pieces of maple and put it with my walnut. So now I'll rip my piece of cherry. Again, the machined edge will go up against the fence. If I wanted to use this edge for some reason, I can take it to the jointer and I can joint it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could joint it probably 91 times and get rid of this live edge. An easy way to do it, if I really wanted to use the white or the spring wood of this board, what I could do is I could take this edge, move it so that I can rip the opposite edge. And of course, these 2 edges would be parallel and they would both be machined. So if you look at that, that's an easy way of not using the jointer, but using the table saw with an already cleaned edge. I want to keep the dark color, so I'm going to leave the machined edge up against the fence. So I said to you I was going to set it to 1 1/8 inches. I'm all set, ready to go. Hold on to my board. Again, the blade is raised to the correct height because I didn't change it. What I want to do is, again, always stand off to the left-hand side, never the right-hand side, because as you know, all of these machines are made for right-handed people. I'm going to hold on to it, start it up. making sure that the board stays up against the fence and using my push block. I make an L with my left hand, and I'm going to sand it all the way through. When I get to this point here, I'm done. What I want to do is I want to make sure that my left hand is not here. I'll drop it completely. And I'll push it all the way through. All the way, all the way, all the way. And when that starts doing that little dance, it's telling me to move out of the way. Because if the backside piece should grab that board, and I've seen it happen, it will shoot it back. So what I want to do is stand off to the left-hand side, shut it off, let that come to a complete stop before I ever attempt to move it. Here's the other thing, and it's kind of cool. I could still use this. If you look, I can bypass that hole. I would cut a piece of maple. I'm sorry. I would cut a piece of cherry that looked very similar to my piece of maple, because as you guys well know, cherry and maple have very much the same grain. So what I want to do is, I'm not going to throw this out. I'll put this off to the side. Maybe somebody could use this. So here are my pieces that I've assembled. If you take a look, I'm going to lay it directly on top of my template. Here was the handle. I said I'm going to use a piece of walnut. Then I said I was going to use this piece of maple. Now I'm going to use a piece of cherry. And then to end it, I can cut another piece off of that. What should it be? Should it be a piece of oak that ties the handle in? Or possibly another piece of maple, because I really like the light colors on the outside. What do you think? What do you think, cameraman? What would you do? Don't give me the shoulders. Somebody's got to make a decision. Which one do you like better? Maybe a piece of walnut on the end? The thing that I don't like about dark woods on the outside is always makes it look like that part of the board doesn't exist. I always like the lighter colors on the outside. Again, that's just me personal taste. And after years of doing this, you kind of develop, I like it, I don't like it. Let me try this piece of oak, which I saw that was kind of I'm not hot on that. Oh, on the board is written a little phrase. And that little phrase says, the thinking is the hard part. Actually, cutting is pretty easy, but when it comes down to what do I want this thing to look like, I'm using my brain. And I always said to you, the best part about woodshop is that you're using your hands, your heart, and your mind. And so many times, the mind usually is the thing that dictates whether this project comes out really good or not so good. You know what I'm going to do? Cameraman's not helping me out. I'm going to use this piece of maple. I'm going to go back to the joiner because I don't like this edge. Cameraman gives me a big thumbs up. That's a like. Years ago, it used to be a thumbs up. Now it's a like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to joint this edge, clean this up a little bit, and I'm going to cut this so I get at least 2 pieces out of this. Hopefully that'll be my end. It looks pretty good. Come on, let's go back to the jointer. When I'm jointing a narrow piece like this, if my thumb fits there on the back end of the board, that's okay. If it goes all the way down, that's not so okay. So on a narrow board when you're jointing, I always have a push block that allows you to take a push block, place it on the back end of the board, and joint your board that way. The other thing that a push block does is it ensures that you're going to keep pressure down towards the back end of your board. As I do this, just like with the table saw, I'm going to grab my piece before I turn the jointer on. Sleeves are rolled up, safety glasses on, I'm all set, ready to go. I'll keep it up against the fence, put pressure down, and I want you to hear this. It sounds chippy. I'll do it again. Listen. You see the chips flying out, it sounds chippy. If if you look at this grain runs in general directions, this way, this way. Of course, this is running this way, but it also runs uphill and downhill. If I have a board that sounds chippy, sometimes if I take the board and flip it around and run it in the opposite direction, it might joint a little bit smoother. Let me try that. Oh, not so chippy. Oh, I like that. That sounded so much better. And that edge feels so much cleaner. The next thing I'm going to do is take my pencil with the broken tip. I sharpened it. What I'm going to do is put an X on the edge, telling me that that's my jointed edge. Back to the table saw. Let's cut. I want to cut 2 pieces out of this. Is it 17 inches? No, it's not. It's only 14. So how do I do this? Well, I have to cut my 2 pieces side by side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the width of this. If I look at it, it's almost like 1 7/8 inches, because you guys know how to read a ruler, of course. I want to get 2 pieces out of it, 1 7/8 inches divided by 2, 1 7/8 inches. It's an odd number. Oh, half of that would be, okay, half of 1 is a half. Throw the half away because it's odd. Add the 2 together to get the new numerator, 15. Multiply the denominator by 2, 60. 15/16 is half of 1 7/8 inches. I have to allow for the width of this blade, so because of that, I'm not going to set it to 15/16. I could set it to 13/16. You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to probably set this to maybe 3/4 of an inch. So I come over here, I'm going to set the fence to about 3/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to hope that I get 2 pieces out of it. By eye, that looks pretty accurate. Take my board, make sure everything is away, start it up, machine edge up against the fence, L with my left hand, and cut. Pressure on the back, send it all the way through. Drop my left hand, all the way, that's not all the way, that's all the way. This piece is my second piece, so I need to get that piece out of there and make a cut. Because this was the waist side, I do have a machined edge. I'll do it the same exact way as I made my cut before. Again, start it so it's not making contact with the blade. Left hand, L. So I just get 2 pieces out of it. And if you look, I'll just take the waist out of here. There is no waist. The waste is this, sawdust. That's ideal, so I didn't waste anything. Take a walk back to my template. Let's see what this thing looks like. So I actually set this up so I'm going to have an issue. If I take this piece, put this piece here, put this piece here, if I measure all these out, I want it to come out to be 3 inches wide. Let's take a look and see how accurate I am. If it's over, who cares? Oops, a little bit over, but that's going to be perfect. I like the way that looks. So now I can look at this and decide how I want these to fit after I cut them in place. So now what I want to do is I'm going to take all of these pieces, I'm going to go over to the miter saw, and I'm going to do the 2 things we talked about with squaring a board. I'm going to square an end, I'm going to cut them all to length, and I'm going to show you exactly how you can set it up so they all come out exactly to 8.5 inches long. You want to take a walk? Let's do this quick. I know you guys are complaining that this is long, but believe you me, after this is done, there won't be any question about how to make this. And I got a second part to cut out the cheese board. Let me walk this way. Excuse me, cameraman. This way, yeah, this way. This way. I brought my template so I can figure out exactly what it is I'm going to do. On all of these pieces, what I want to do is, come back here. They're cut to a workable length. What I want to do is I want to square an end. When I square this end, it doesn't matter what end I square, but what I want to do is look at this and always square the best end. It's like jointing an edge on the jointer. Which edge do you joint? Always the best edge. So over here, I'm going to take all of these pieces and square these off. When I square them, I'm going to put an X on the end. Using the same practices that I talked about last week, I'm going to assess this. Take my board, put it up against the fence, slide it over with my left hand, and I'm taking just a hair off of this end. Of course, if I squared it off that much, the piece is going to be short of 8.5. So I'm going to do this on all of my pieces as I cut. Hold it with my left. Shut it off. I'm going to slide it out, keep the saw down until it makes a complete stop. There's my squared end. Some people say on this piece of walnut, you have to get rid of this end. Well, eventually I'm going to cut it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. If this was the better of the two sides, I'd square this end. If I assess this, I think I'm going to square this end. Up against the fence, slide it over. Slide it out, keep the saw down. There's my squared end. And I'll do the same thing on my cherry, which is the better of the two ends. You know what? Let's use this end. My maple. My maple. And my little piece of maple as well. Thank you. Somebody thought I sneezed. No, that was just a cough. But I appreciate the God bless you, and I'll take it. Now, I want to cut these to the length that they have to be. I want them all exactly the same length. Everybody knows, who's ever worked in this shop, there's a trick to this. Some people will always look at this and say, oh, you cut them with a stop because all of these pieces have to be 8.5 inches long. There's an issue with this because if I take this piece and place it over here, a lot of times this stop that I made will not fit very well onto here. So what I'm going to do is set up my own stop. And when you think about it, it's really not difficult. I'm going to take one of these pieces. I'm actually going to measure this out from the squared end. Don't make the lethal mistake of measuring it from the unsquared end because that's the end I want to keep. I'm going to move my tape measure to at least 8.5 inches. Now here's the story, kids. Don't tell anybody I'm telling you this. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. I'm going to make it 8 3/4. The reason why I'm going to do that is I've allowed a little bit when I square it up to become 8.5 inches. And we really can't tell you how to do that until after we glue this up. But this is the length I want all my pieces to be. That's not going to be a problem. To do that, I'm going to bring the piece that I want to cut over to the saw. Again, holding the motor, I'm going to bring the saw down and see where it lines up. Again, I'm not cutting on the line, I'm cutting to the line. That looks pretty accurate right there. To set up a stop, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a deep throat clamp. I'm going to grab a piece of scrap wood. And to tell you the truth, I could even use the handle that I was using on my project. I'm going to put it up against the fence, slide it over so it makes contact, and now I'm going to take the deep throat clamp and clamp it right here to the fence. So if you notice, my pieces, if that butts up against there and I bring the saw down, it cuts exactly where I want it to cut. So now the easy part comes. Take the squared end, butt it up against the stop. With my left hand, hold on to my stock, and I'm going to cut each one of these pieces. I can't slide the wood off to the left-hand side because there's a stop there. And what I don't want to do is pull this out while the saw is running. So I actually have to wait until it comes to a complete stop. So if you notice, I left my line. It's about 8 3/4, which who cares if it's a little bit long. I'm going to cut all the other pieces. But what I have to do is find my squared end. There's my squared end. Butt it up against the fence. And I do this for each one of these. Yeah, I know it's boring. I know. Don't start. Don't complain to me. Squared end over here. Good. Up against the fence. The other thing that you don't want to do, and some people run into this because they do push-ups. If you take this and slam it up against the fence, if I move, slam it up against the stop, if I move that stop, everything changes. I don't want to do that. I just want to place it up against that stop. It allows me to cut all these pieces exactly the same length. Exactly the same length. Where's my squared end on my cherry? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I don't know if I squared my end up on my cherry. Uh-oh, the stop's already set. Now we have a problem. How do I square this end if the stop is in the way? Hey, check it out. Check it out. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Look, this is where the thinking is the hard part. How about if I square the end off of the right-hand side? Dude, is this guy on today or what? I simply move my board off to the right-hand side, and instead of cutting with my left hand and right hand on the handle, I'm going to switch my hands. Hold on to my stock with my right hand. Hold on to my board, my handle with my left hand. So there is my squared end. Nice move, Johnny boy. There's my squared end. Did I square my walnut? Oh, yeah, I did. I didn't screw that one up. So now what I'm going to do is I take this, place it up against my stop, cut. Take my piece, slide it over. Last piece is a piece of walnut. Let's see. There's my squared end. Cut. Oh, don't want to do that. Oh, I don't want to do that either. Some people ask me, which way should I cut it? Should I cut it this way, this way? It doesn't really matter because all 4 of these sides have been machined. I'll raise that up on its own. I now have all of my pieces. My handle was my stop, and all I have to do now is arrange this the way I want this to go. So if I do this, handles here, what do I like? Maple, and something I want to show you about this wider piece of maple, and this is a very common mistake that people make. If you look at this, the thickness and the width, this is actually the thickness over here, this is the width, are very similar. What you want to do is, and again, the thinking is the hard part, I want to make sure that when I put this up against here, that this is in the correct direction. This raises up a little bit here. So what you want to do is make sure that when you put these together, they go like that. So that the thickness is the same. It's very, very similar. You could also look at the grain to identify which is the surface, which is the edge. I know that that's the surface. So if I place this up against here, but I had that piece of walnut there first. You tell me, it doesn't go like that. You tell me which way you like this best. Do you like it that way? Raise your hand if you like it that way. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I could change this any way I would like. So maybe I take this and I move this piece here. What do you think of that? Oh, I like that. That looks better because I have the light on the outside. I have a contrast here between the cherry and the walnut. Maybe if I move this off to the side, how about this? Which one do you like better? I kind of like the walnut better here. So much of this is personal taste. But again, the most important thing with this is to make sure that when you do this, you think about it. And the other thing is you get what you want. It's like Burger King. You can have it your way. But again, it's just scrap wood. When you're doing this, you're just making this out of scrap wood. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these pieces, I'm going to bring them over to the glue table, I'm going to glue all these pieces up. When I do that, we'll talk to you a little bit about that, and then maybe introduce you guys to the template, cutting that out, the bandsaw, and then finally surfacing this down so that we clean it up. We might surface it, we might not. If you have any questions, make sure you email them to me. I'll be more than happy to answer them. But again, I really want you guys to understand that you want to think before you do. And in this shop, everything matters. Okay? Have a good one, and I'll see you on the glue table to glue it up.